Hey guys, this is Keelan, welcome back to the channel, and I've got a question for you. Do you have 6-inch thumbs? Yeah, I didn't think so. So why are we so adamant on placing the mobile menu at the top of every page? Why don't we just place it down here where our thumb is and expand the menu to reveal the mobile navigation? Well, that's exactly what we're going to do today. So load up Visual Studio Code, follow along, and let's jump right in. Alright, here we are. So I'm in Visual Studio Code. I've got a basic environment setup. I've left a link in the description below where you can download this repository from my GitHub to start in the exact same place as me. All I've done is included some basic text, some styles just to give this a nice little appearance, and a nice button down here which does expand just a little bit, and then we can get this on the go and just focus purely on the functionality and how this expanding mobile menu works. Okay, so let's move on. So the first thing that we're going to do is create our divs for our expanding menu. Now this needs to be contained, otherwise whenever we create an expanding element, it's going to want to expand beyond the fold of the web page. And so we need that main container element to keep it all contained, as the name would imply. So firstly, let's create a div. I'm going to call this mobile menu container. And these are quite long class names, but on this channel, especially for example purposes, I like to say it how it is. Okay. And then within the container, we're going to have I'm going to call it a background element, which will be the aspect that expands to reveal our menu. So I'm going to create a div, and I'm going to call this my menu BG. Great stuff. And then the next thing we want in here, of course, is our nav, which is going to be a good old-fashioned nav with some list items, and then within here you can have some links, some link elements. And then I'm just going to do home. You can do whatever you want in here, but I'm just going to do the standard home, about, maybe your portfolio if you're trying to show off, and then of course the ability to contact. Alright, great stuff. So that's the initial setup complete. So the first thing we're going to do is pop into styles, and I'm going to grab the class from our container, which is just mobile menu container, and then we're going to give this a height of 100% viewport height, a width of 100% viewport width, and then a position of fixed and a top of 0 pixels, so it's perfectly in line with the top, and then a left of 0 pixels, so it's perfectly in line with the left side here. And you can see it's taken effect because now our navigation elements, which are within the container, now sit on top of our section here. And if you want to get a good look at what our container looks like, just change the background color briefly to red, and you can see it ticks up perfectly the full square of the screen. So let's get rid of that, because of course we don't want a big red screen. And then we're going to move on to our expanding element, and this is going to be that element that expands up and out in a big circular shape to cover the section. So back in our index.html, we've called this element menu BG. So I'm just going to take that, and we're going to come into here, paste that in, and make sure you put in a full stop at the beginning of these names here to tell the document that these are classes. So what do we want this element to look like? Well, I kind of want it to look very much like the button itself. So if I look at the button styles, it's got position of fixed, bottom right of 30 pixels, so we can take those. And I'm also going to take the width and the height, but I'm going to make this red just so we have a bit of distinction, and I'm going to move it up to 100 pixels just so it's not perfectly in line with our button right now, because when we're done we will want this hidden behind our button for when we click the button and it expands. But you can see right here, so this is our element to start, and of course we're going to want a border radius of 50% to create a nice circle. But how do we create the expansion? Well, we're going to use transform scale. So if I go into our menu BG again, but do a colon, and we're going to actually write active, and then we're going to just do a transform scale, and we're going to do it by a factor of 50. And before we do anything else, I'm going to pop back into a menu BG class here, do transition of 0.6 seconds, ease in out with 0 seconds delay. And then when we click on our element here, and you can see this element expands. But of course we don't want it to do it whenever we click on it. We want it to occur whenever we click on this button. So how are we going to achieve this? Well, we're going to be using a little bit of JavaScript, but don't be scared. You know, this is going to be very minimalist in the JavaScript department, and I promise I'll explain it as best as I can. So before we move forward, I want to give these divs some IDs just so we can access them in our JavaScript document. So I'm going to give this an ID of my mob container. I'm going to give this an ID of my menu BG. Just keep it very easy and simple. And then in terms of our navigation here, I'm going to give this an ID of my mob nav. Nice and simple and easy to work with. But before we carry on, quick intermission for a coffee break. So let's go into our JavaScript here and see how we're going to modify this element here. So the aim here is to just toggle this class. So I'm going to rename this to menu BG open. And so the first thing we're going to do, and you'll do this a lot when you're working with JavaScript and doing basic DOM manipulation, we call it caching the DOM, and that's where we create a couple of variables which will just be equal to document.getElement by ID, and then we just specify the ID of the element we're trying to grab, essentially. And we want the button, which I've got a ID of my menu btn. So I'm going to paste that in here, and that's our button. We've got it. You know, we can play around with it, and we also need to access our expanding element here, and we've called this my menu BG. And so I'm going to do the same again, but I'm going to call this my BG, and then do document.getElement by ID, paste that in there. And now we can do it. Now we can do the fun stuff. So we're going to tap into our button, and we're going to do .add event listener. Then we're going to do click, and then also pass in a callback function. And then so this just says when we click on this button, I want you to do something. And what we wanted to do is to tap into our BG element and pop into the class list and toggle a particular class. And I wonder what that's going to be. It's going to be menu BG open. So, and just for debugging purposes, I'm also going to do a console log here that just says you clicked me. So if something doesn't work, we can see if the console log is getting logged and if these things are actually working. So let's try it. Let's click on our button, and there we have it. The button is expanding and it's working really well. But of course, the problem you have here is when you need to make sure you hide the overflow, because when you expand an element like this, it's going to drastically increase the scroll bars, because the browser is going to want to give you as much of a view of this expanded element as it can. So what we need to do is pop into our styles, and in our mole menu container we can do overflow hidden, and this just makes sure that when this does expand, anything beyond the fold or beyond the screen is completely cut off. It's as if it doesn't exist, and that's exactly what we want. And if we click this again, it comes back. Beautiful. And to finish up, we're gonna change this to white and drop this to 30 so that it's hidden behind our button, and then we click, and there we have the main functionality. Now we're going to move on to the reveal of the navigation. Okay, so let's add some styles to the nav. So I'm going to pop down here. I'm just going to do nav, not doing a full stop here because this is targeting the direct element. And so what do we need to do to the nav? Well, first things first, let's center everything up and make sure it's nice and centered on the page. So I'm going to do width of 100%, height of 100%, and we can use percentage values here because our navigation sits inside our container, which is equal to the height and width of the viewport. And now if we do background color red, just so we can see what this looks like, you can see our nav now takes up this entire section. But of course we do need to center that text, so we're going to tap into Flexbox here. We're going to do display flex, and then we're going to flex direction column because I want everything going in a downwards direction, and then I'm going to justify content center and also align items center, and this centers everything up for us. Of course we do have this little issue with the link still being decorated. Our list is adding these bullet points. We don't want those, so we're just going to go UL A, tap into the links and simply do text decoration of none and do list style of none. And there, that deals with that pretty quickly. And then we'll also want to perhaps text align center. That's looking pretty good to me. And maybe we need to give these some classes too, just so we can style these elements. So while holding Alt, I'm going to click here so we can edit all these at the same time. I'm going to do class, and I'm just going to give these a class of nav link, just so we can add some styles here. Okay, so then I'm going to do nav link in here. And what we're going to do, well, first things first, let's increase the font size to something like 24 pixels, and then give them some padding, so maybe around 2 rem all around. Whoops. Yeah, that's nicely spaced out to me, and I'd like them nice and bold too, so I'm just going to do font weight of 700, and I like it. That looks pretty good to me. And also I'm going to do, I need to tap into these links because I don't like the color, so .nav link A, and the colors I've got within my document here, because I went for a nice pink and a nice blue, so I'm going to give this a nice color of blue, and I've used 344 BD8 if you'd like to, you know, exactly match mine. I'm just gonna change this red briefly to blue, to white, sorry, just so we get a bit, you know, a bit more of an accurate representation of what this is gonna look like when it's done. And then I'm gonna add a little bit of a hover effect. So now A, hover, color, and I've got a bit of a pink color to go along with this. Oops. And yeah, that looks good. But of course, the transition is a bit quick, so it'd be nice to have a bit of a transition on these two. So maybe if I tap into these ones and just do transition just so it's the same across the board, 0.3 ease, no delay. Okay, beautiful. That's good to me. So that is essentially our navigation done in terms of style, and this is what it's going to look like on the page. But of course, now we need to build the functionality. So, because right now, if I click our menu icon, it expands, but you can see our mobile navigation is actually underneath, and that's not what we want. We always want our mobile navigation to be at the forefront of anything that we're doing. So we're gonna have to give our nav a Z index, and I'm just gonna give it something really big that's never gonna be overtaken. And whenever you use Z index in CSS, you also need to give your position something other than static. We're just going to use relative, which just means it's going to stay exactly where it is relative to its parent container, but it's going to be at the Z index. And now when we press this button, we shouldn't see a white cover in it because it's now behind it. There we go. Perfect. So it is working, it's just that we can't see it. And of course, we don't actually want a white background on our nav here because we want to rely on our div here. And I know it kind of looks like it's fading right now, but it's not. It's just because the background is blue. We're not there yet, but we're getting close. The functionality is almost there. So the last thing that's left to do is to use JavaScript to tell our website that whenever the menu is closed, I want you to make this text disappear. Whenever it's open, I want you to make it reappear. Okay, to save some time, I've gone ahead and pre-configured 3 extra classes here that we're going to use to make these links disappear. So, first things first, we're going to use a hidden class, which when applied to an element, of course, is just going to hide it. And then I've used some transitions here to adjust the time delays between the visibility. So of course, if an object has the visible class, then it's going to be visible, and then the way the transition will work is that it will take 0.9 seconds to appear with a 0.6 second delay, and that 0.6 seconds is the amount of time that it takes for our menu to open. So it just ensures that our links don't appear until this has opened. And then we've got a third container here, which just hides our whole container when we're not using it. Because if we left it there without hiding the visibility, it would mean we couldn't actually click on anything that was on the main body of the website, because essentially we'd be clicking on an invisible element. So let's jump into some JavaScript here. So we're going to need to pop into our index, and using some of the IDs I've got set up here, so we're going to need to access the container, and just like we did previously, we're going to tap into, we're going to create some more DOM objects here. So I'm going to call this my container, which is equal to document.getElementById and my container, and then the same again for the navigation. And I'm just going to back into our JavaScript const my mob nav is equal to document.getElementById my mobile nav. Okay, so what do we want to do? Well, whenever we click this button now, we wanted to do a couple of things. We wanted to toggle our main container. We also wanted to toggle the visibility of these elements here. So let's do the main links. So initially, our links will need to be set to hidden, because whenever a user comes to the website, we don't want the links to be there in their face. So just make sure our nav is set to hidden from the start, so that when we tap into my mobNav.classList.toggle, it's going to toggle this and make it turn on. So if we try this now, you can see it comes on. Only issue is it happens instantly straight away, which means we need to add the mybmobNav.classList.toggle and give it that visible class, which should slow it down with the transition properties that we utilized. Beautiful. And that is almost complete. It's just one last thing now, which is to tap into the container to toggle class list, and we're going to do the hide container. And just like with the links here, this needs to be hidden by default, so that when a user comes to the page, they can click on things, they can interact, but as soon as they click on this menu, they can no longer click on anything in the background, and they only have access to these links, and we can click it off and they're right back to where they started. And with that, our tutorial is complete. I hope you've learned a lot doing this tutorial, and I hope you're taking regular breaks and introducing maybe a coffee in between each tutorial. But on that note, have a nice day. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next one.